Hey everybody, welcome back to Readers That Write. Today we've got a fun episode, but one that I think talks about a topic that has been pretty common in discussion lately, and that's using diverse mythologies and histories in your fantasy writing. So stay tuned after the jump and we'll dive into it. Hey everybody, welcome back from the jump. We've got a fun topic to talk about today. It's one that I've become very passionate about as I've been reading more and more lately and focusing on improving my craft as a writer. And it's something that I've noticed very frequently as I've been reading. And that is the diversity of the baseline materials used to create fantasy worlds and things like that. Now, before we start, as a disclaimer, there is nothing wrong with using the standard formats and mythologies for your stories. I have done that, and I have done that elsewise as well. So there is no hate for people who go one way or the other. I just enjoy unique points of view and unique stories, especially given a lot of my history and my family. I do like to discover more of these other mythologies, as a lot of people probably don't know, especially blonde hair and the blue eyes make it a little complicated. My family hails from a lot of different places. Some of my appearance comes from some Viking heritage, but I also have a large Mongol heritage as well. And my surname, which my pen name and surname and public name are the same. So Tartar is Tatar, which is actually the Mongol tribe that Genghis Khan hails from. It's been fun to learn more about that part of my family because, given everything that's happened in history, they were very tied to Western Europe, and by the time they came to the Americas, a lot of that heritage got put aside. So a lot of my life and a lot of research has been rediscovering that kind of those backgrounds. Because of that, I've learned that I love diverse stories. Now, I know the word diverse can be a hot button issue on both sides of the spectrum, and it is something that I think needs to be far less of a hot button. Drawing sides can cause a lot of problems, and that is not my intent today. My intent is to recognize stories that let us view parts of the world and part of history and part of mythology that we didn't get to do, or that we don't commonly get. And I want to encourage authors to look into this kind of stuff and research it and try and do it justice in your mythological worlds. Learn about different places than just medieval England, and strive to tie those parts of the world into your stories as well. It creates amazing characters. It creates very different drama, and it creates a whole different element to the story that isn't common and isn't expected. A few authors have done this spectacularly. And the first one I want to talk about is actually the book that kind of inspired this. And that is The Art of Prophecy by Wesley Chu. I had the pleasure of meeting him at Dragonsteel and getting it signed. And I have to say, this is probably my top book of the year so far. Yes, I do know that Stormlight 5 is coming out this year, so it probably won't stay my top book, but it will definitely be a solid number 2, barring some freak surprise book that's coming as well. This is a fantastic story that Wesley pulls from a lot of Asian culture and Asian heritage and his martial arts skills to pull in that mythology. the mythology that we often see in kung fu movies and things like that. So it is an epic fantasy mixed with a kung fu movie, and it is spectacular. I can't wait to keep diving into this series, and I'll definitely be doing that a lot, hopefully this year. I do have a lot of books slated for this year already, and this one kind of snuck up on me, Dragonsteel. I had heard of Wesley before, and I'd heard a lot of good things about him, but hadn't actually intended on getting this book initially until I was sitting in a writer's panel at Dragonsteel, and he got to talk about how his martial arts experiences influenced the story as well. A lot of people don't know this about me either. Growing up, I studied a lot of martial arts as well to help me learn discipline and things like that. So we do share a lot of that background with that martial arts and discipline. And while studying martial arts, sometimes you'll learn histories of things like sword types and fighting styles that tie back to mythology and legend. And it was so cool to see it so heavily and so deeply used in this book. And while we're on this subject, it's something that I've tried to do as well, but this book was a masterclass in it. Now, as an author or as a reader, we don't have to dive this deep into it. You don't have to go full Kung Fu movie to include different sectors of the world and their histories and mythologies into your stories. I always recommend at least once a year picking a place in the world that you know nothing about and learning about it. This doesn't have to just be an author thing. This is something I would recommend everyone do. If you have the means to travel there, great. I don't, unfortunately. But I love to cook. I love to read. So a lot of what I'll do is I'll put on even just simple YouTube videos of English-speaking people from that area to learn about things like their religion and their mythology. I'll try and learn recipes from that area. Currently, my focus for part of last year and this year was the Indochina area, and I learned that was way too broad a spectrum for me to try and pick. So lately, I have refined this to northern India. That's been my focus heavily this last year. I actually went and had been studying a lot about the Sikhs and wrote a short story about it. A sci-fi short story where the Sikhs were the main characters. That was a lot of fun to write. It took a lot of research. They are very, very cool people. And I hope someday to get to meet them and visit that part of the world. But that doesn't mean, or doing all of this allows you to get to know these different cultures and can inspire books. One of the really good examples of this is Brandon Sanderson. A lot of his books, especially the Stormlight Archives, are heavily influenced by the time he spent in Korea and the people and the mythology he got to learn about there. My time in Brazil has influenced a lot of storytelling as well. I do tie in a lot of mythologies and the people and the cultures that I dealt with while I spent my time down there. So how far is too far? What is not far enough? These are questions that authors are going to have to deal with on a regular basis. Like I said, I just used two very different examples between Wesley Chu, who took basically a Kung Fu movie style and a very Eastern Asian culture into his books that it heavily involved, versus Brandon Sanderson, who does have a lot of that influence, but he laces it subtly throughout his books. If you didn't know that it was Korean and North Chinese influence, you would never know. But one of the things I actually loved with one of his Kickstarters this year was the miniatures that came out, and you got to see things like the shard plate, which a lot of people in artwork represented it very Western. As you can see behind me, I do collect a lot of helmets. I also collect a lot of weapons too, which I can't show on YouTube. But these helmets are some of my family. I do have Viking heritage, like I talked about. I have English, and that is a Muslim Tatar helmet. But we got to see a lot more of this style in a lot of the Stormlight Archives minis that I think a lot of people weren't expecting. And I think that's fantastic. I love a good, subtle tie. I also love the blatant stuff too, to be fair. So I guess the short answer to how much is too much and how much is not enough is as long as you make it a good story and you are not stereotyping that culture, that is good. Take your time, do your due diligence, and make sure that that culture is represented properly. But don't do it at the sacrifice of the story. That has been a problem I have seen a lot lately. As diversity has become a bigger push for authors, I have seen some of the story writing quality go down. And having that culture or that group be the entire point of the book ruins the book. I am all for representation and people putting characters in books that they would encounter in the real world. I do like that, but it can go way too far. So, as authors, like I said, I would encourage you to strive to learn about new places and learn about new things that tie into these cultures. There are some great mythological stories that will inspire your stories. There's great things that happen in history that just learning the basics will inspire a story. One of my favorite things to do is learn about mythology and history and then turning around and applying them to science fiction or to fantasy. I do have to give Warhammer 40k a little credit here. They did try to do this. A lot of this was done in the 70s and 80s when the resources we have today weren't available. So there are some things that they do that today would be a little bit of a gray area and would seem a little stereotypy. But they tried. They tried long before other people had tried. In Warhammer 40k, my favorite legion, the 5th, or the White Scars, is based around the Mongols. Yes, they have some stereotypical traits, but the people who created them did enough research to learn about the foundations of Mongolian religion and how it is very elemental heavy, and how that type of belief and customs weighs very heavily on them, and how their desire to do what's right and to protect those they care about is the driving force to basically move them forward. And a lot of this and their deep desire for pure truth is a major component of the White Scars. So I do have to, like I said, give credit where credit is due, considering those were created in this, I think, the late 70s and early 80s, when none of this was even talked about or common. And the most diverse you'd see in a lot of the fantasy worlds was Greek mythology. Even Norse mythology wasn't common at the time. We saw a few creep-ins because of Beowulf, but the vast majority of it was focused around the British Isles and France and Germany. Once again, no hate to those. I do love those stories too. I am a massive Arthurian legend fan. So what I hope to accomplish today is to give you guys ideas and encouragement of ways that you can grow and expand your writing or your reading, because doing that will increase the diversity and will encourage authors to write good stories with diverse tie-ins instead of writing diversity with a half-baked story. So now for my favorite part of these episodes is the good books that I can recommend. Some of these are secondhand recommendations. I have not had a chance to read all of them. Those that I have not read are on my TBR. So, number one, this is a must read for any fantasy fan that I know. Please read this book. It is a spectacular book. And honestly, had I read it in 2023, it would have been Book of the Year in 2023. 2024, it is the Book of the Year so far. Unfortunately, probably the one book that could have unseated it comes out this year, which is the finale to the Stormlight Archives, or at least the first 5. And that is the one book I expect that could eclipse this book. It will have to put up a very good fight to beat it, though. Okay. Now, I have 4 more recommendations. Like I said, I have not read all of them, but all 4 of them come highly recommended from good friends and family that have. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these books, which I will try and throw the cover of book 1 right here. For those of you watching YouTube. For those of you not watching YouTube, I will talk about them and describe them so that you at least know what we're talking about. So, the first book recommendation that I've gotten a lot is one that I have not read, but it takes place, or it's inspired by a lot of the cultures that I'm currently studying and trying to learn more about. And that's the Padva series, and I apologize if I butchered these authors' names. I will try my best to get it right. But it's by Roshani Chokshi. It is inspired by Indian mythology, and from what I've heard is absolutely spectacular. There are currently 4 books in the series. I do not know if that's all of them. Stay tuned. I will be putting out some book reviews as I get through these. The next one is one that I have read book 1 of, and I did thoroughly enjoy. There are actually 3 books in the series now. I picked it up and read it a few years ago when book 1 was out, and that is the Stormrunner series. This series is inspired by a lot of the Mayan culture and legends. I do highly recommend it. The next one is one that I absolutely love as well. It has 2 books in the series right now, and that is the 1,000 Words series. This one is inspired heavily by Korean culture, which is one that I have learned to love for a long, long time. I studied Taekwondo since I was pretty small. Taekwondo is a Korean martial art, so I learned some basic Korean. I got to learn a lot about the Korean culture and their history through that practice. And this was one of the books that, as soon as I saw it, I picked up and absolutely loved. The next one is one that every time I talk about this kind of stuff with anyone, they bring up, and that is the Tristan Strong series by Kwame Mabali. And once again, I apologize if I butchered that. And it is focused on a lot of African culture and its inspiration, as well as African American culture as well. So take these book recommendations, check them out, please. And if you have any more stories like this, please comment them below. I am always looking for stories like this so that I can learn and be inspired as well. And if you have any authors, or if you know of any cultures that you've never seen a fantasy or a science fiction book about, comment that below as well. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you for joining us on Readers That Write Today. We'll see you next week.